Welcome to Part 4 of Ridgewood. Visit brooksaudioBooks.com for an awesome collection of unique, full-length audiobooks. And be sure to subscribe to be notified when new books are released. Chapter 13. Dinner was prepared and enjoyed as quickly as possible after Tom and Sam returned to camp, for all three boys were eager to finally start work on the long-awaited new boat. "The Red Bird was wrecked last Thursday," Henry said, "and now it's Monday, yet we haven't even begun to get ready to build." "Yes, we have, Henry," Sam replied. "We've worked hard on the most important part. We've made great plans for our food, and that's a good start. But we're getting to work on the boat itself today. By the way, Tom, you're going to be the master builder." "Well, I'm not so sure about that," Tom said. "You were showing off the other day about your skills, while I'm pretty modest in that area. I'm honestly not great with tools." "No, I didn't show off," Sam countered. "I was just stating the facts. I think I'm a better craftsman than either of you, so I'm willing to take on the harder tasks, but you need to be the one in charge." "I don't see why," Tom said. "Because, even if you are clumsy with tools, you understand boats better in a minute than Henry, and I do in a year. It's just common sense to assign each person the role they are best suited for." "Fine," Henry said. "I'm the best at sitting on a log and watching you guys work, so I'll take that as my job." "No, you won't," Tom said. "If I'm supervising, I'll find something more useful for you to do. Look, Sam, it's ridiculous for me to try to tell you how to do things that you can do 10 times better than I can. I don't want you to tell me how to do it, but what to do. Then we'll all tackle it together. I'll handle the hardest parts, and I can also give you and Henry some tips on how to manage your part, if you'd like." "Okay," Tom replied. "I'll take on the role of superintendent if you want." "Great," Sam said. "Now let's sketch out the boat, figure out the dimensions, and decide how to get started." "Let me think for a moment," Tom said. "The Red Bird was 24 feet long at the keel, 25 feet overall, and 5 feet wide at its widest point. We need to allow extra room for waste since we're using old materials, so let's reduce the length by 6 feet, making the new boat's keel 18 feet long and the total length about 19 feet. We can let the width sort itself out." "What do you mean by that?" Sam asked. "Well, we'll only shorten the boat in the middle. That is, we'll remove 6 or 8 ribs from the old boat's center and shift the next ribs forward and backward to close the gap. The width those ribs provide will be the boat's width at midsection. This way, we'll keep the original proportions while adjusting the dimensions. The new boat will essentially be the same shape as the Red Bird would have been if we had cut 6 feet from the middle and pulled the ends together." "Got it," Henry said. "What's the first thing we need to do?" "We start by laying the keel," Tom said. "The old keel is broken, so we need a new one. Plus, the old keel was designed for a centerboard, and we'll have to build this without one." "What measurements do we need for the keel?" Sam inquired. "It should be about 18 feet long, and roughly 3 inches by 6 or 7 in width." "Should it be positioned on edge?" Sam asked. "Yes, it should extend below the bottom of the boat. That'll help keep it steady." "What's the best type of wood for the keel?" Sam wanted to know. "White oak would be ideal if we had any, but we don't. Longleaf yellow pine is almost as good, and for our needs, it's actually a better choice since it's easier to work with. There's a slender, straight tree trunk just beyond the camp that will be perfect for us. It seems to have been lying there for quite a few years and is nicely seasoned. All we need to do is cut it to the right length, split off some slabs until we get a rough square, and then shape it down to the right dimensions with the axe and hatchet. This will keep us busy for at least 2 days, so let's get started." The reality of the situation soon showed that Tom had underestimated the time necessary for this task. The hard, flinty yellow pine, seasoned as it was, proved to be quite tough to work with. The axe and hatchet were dull even before they began, and by nightfall, both were annoyingly blunt. The following day, they were practically useless. Henry joked that he could nearly do as well using his teeth, but he didn't attempt that. There was no grindstone in camp, and none to be found, so the weary boys had to make the best of it, struggling along with their dull tools. By Thursday, the keel still wasn't finished, and the rice began to dwindle under the pressure of the boys' appetites. "Hey, guys," Henry said, "one of us needs to go after more rice." "Definitely," Tom agreed. "It's ripe now, and it'll all fall if we don't get a good amount soon. Why don't you go, Henry?" "Sure, I'm not much good at carpentry compared to either of you, so I'll head out. Take off your trousers, both of you." "What?" Tom started to protest. "Listen," Henry interjected. "I know I should take a bag or a sheet, or even better, the spring wagon. But since we don't have a wagon, bag, or sheet, the only thing left to carry rice in is trousers, so I'm going to use mine." And remembering how ripped up Sam's legs were after his stroll through the briars with no trousers on, I'm not about to sacrifice my own for that. "Now off with your pantaloons, boys, and be quick about it. I'm making 2 trips today to haul in rice for the whole season." With laughter the boys complied, and Henry left them working in their shirts and drawers. He returned to camp by mealtime, fully loaded with rice. After dinner he made his second trip, promising he would be back by sunset. The sun set as expected, but Henry did not return. Darkness fell, and still there was no sign of him. Tom and Sam began to feel uneasy. They ventured into the woods behind their camp and called out loudly, but no reply came. "Listen, Tom," said Sam. "We need to build a beacon fire. Henry must have taken longer to fill his bags and got lost trying to find his way back." No sooner said than done. They piled pitch pine and started a blaze that could be seen for miles. The boys shouted themselves hoarse, yet still got no answer. After an hour of anxious waiting, Tom said, "Sam, I'm going to the rice patch to look for Henry. Something must have gone wrong. You stay here and keep the fire burning bright. If I need you, I'll shout loud enough for you to hear me." "But Tom, it's a dangerous venture to head to the rice field on a night like this. It's pitch black, and you're barefooted and almost naked. Let me go instead." "I understand all that," Tom replied, "but it would be wrong to leave Henry alone. Honestly, I can't see that you're any better prepared for the journey than I am. You're barefoot too, and just as nearly naked." "Yes, I guess you're right," Sam answered, "but I'm not worried about myself." "Stay here, you kind-hearted, brave friend," was all Tom said as he set off into the dark. Both Sam and Tom understood that the journey they were about to undertake would come with considerable danger, as well as great discomfort and suffering. The deadly moccasin and rattlesnake hid in the grass and weeds of that coastal area, and with bare feet, Tom risked their fangs with every step. However, he was too courageous to shy away from danger when a real duty called, so he set out determinedly. Armed with a stick, he struck the ground often, trying to avoid stepping on any snakes that might cross his path. More than once, he heard the angry hisses of the venomous creatures before they scuttled away. Caught up in his urgency, he neglected to watch for briars and brushwood, and before he reached the rice swamp, his meager clothing was nearly torn off, leaving his skin scratched and bleeding. Although his coat shielded his shoulders and arms, his legs, hands, and face bore the brunt of the brambles. Meanwhile, Sam tended to the beacon fire, enduring as much anxiety and impatience as Tom faced physical pain. Poor Sam struggled with the torment of waiting, imagining all sorts of horrors that could have befallen Henry. Then worry turned to Tom, and he shuddered at the thought of the perils his friend might be facing. The inability to act felt unbearable. He couldn't stay still. It was as if he were pacing like a caged tiger, desperately needing to find some way to ease his restless energy. Eventually, darker thoughts began to creep in. He thought he heard Tom groaning in the bushes to his left, and then it seemed he heard Henry crying out in pain from the woods on his right. A search revealed nothing, and Sam returned to his anxious vigil, consumed with suspense. It was well past midnight when Tom finally came back, battered, bleeding, exhausted from his efforts, and limping from a wound in his foot. He had stepped on something sharp, maybe a thorn or a jagged piece of wood, which had embedded itself deep in the flesh of his heel, and the wound was now badly swollen. "Thank goodness you're safe," Sam exclaimed with genuine relief. Did you find anything about poor Henry?" "Nothing," Tom replied, returning Sam's firm handshake. "I went to the rice field and found where he had been thrashing, but there was no other sign of him. He must have finished and headed home since there was no threshed rice left behind. I couldn't find a trail in the dark, and I have no idea what happened to Henry. I called for him over and searched all around the marsh, but it was no good. Besides, if he were anywhere nearby, he would know how to get home. I could see not just the light from our fire, but the flames themselves." "Well, you stay here and let me go," Sam insisted, getting ready to set out. "What's the point?" Tom asked. "I've done everything I can until daylight. If you go now, you'll just risk injuring yourself, and then there'll be no one left to continue the search when morning comes, and we might have a better chance." This was so clearly a reasonable perspective that Sam had no choice, though reluctantly, but to stay put. Hour after hour, the two boys waited and watched, maintaining the beacon fire and occasionally checking any sounds they heard, or thought they heard, from the woods and underbrush around them. Naturally, their conversation was sparse. There was nothing to discuss besides Henry's disappearance, and they had little to say about that. It began to rain, softly at first, then pouring heavily as morning approached, yet neither boy considered seeking shelter in the hut. In fact, neither seemed to notice that it was raining at all. They were only aware of the intense anxiety with which they were spending the hours of a night that felt nearly endless. Chapter 14. As the first light of dawn broke, Tom said, "Sam, we need to keep our heads. Remember what you said after the wreck. We've got to look after Henry today, and we might need all our wits and strength. So for his sake, if not our own, we've got to force down a proper breakfast. It'll steady us and give us the strength we need. I know neither of us feels like eating, but we can't skip it. We haven't had a bite since noon yesterday, and if we keep this up, we won't be fit for anything." "That's true," Sam replied. "We need to eat breakfast." "Then let's get started so we can finish it before it's fully light. We can't afford to waste any time getting out there." "You can't leave camp," Sam insisted. "Your foot is really swollen, and your leg too." "I know," Tom replied, "but I'm going regardless. We have to find Henry, and both of us might be needed when we do." While they debated, breakfast was being prepared, and soon the two disheartened friends began the challenging task of force-feeding themselves. "What do you think we should do, Sam?" Tom asked. "I'm not really sure. Maybe we should go around the island, each taking a different route, shouting and looking. That way, if one of us finds Henry and needs help, the other can get there quickly." "Not quite," Tom said. "The island is pretty large, and it must be several miles around. Wouldn't it make more sense to take a direct path?" "How?" Sam inquired. "We should head to the rice swamp first. We'll almost certainly be able to find and follow Henry's trail from there." "Of course," Sam exclaimed. "What was I thinking not to consider that right away? I think last night's worry, especially when you were away, got to me. I think I lost my mind for a bit, and I'm still trying to find it again." "Hey, what's that?" Tom exclaimed, standing up to look. As he did, the bushes near the shore to the left of their camp rustled, and— "Wow, it's Henry!" both boys shouted at once. "Did you think I'd run off with your pants?" Henry said, appearing with 2 pairs of trousers stuffed full of soggy rice. "Goodness, Henry, where have you been?" "We've had a terrible night," Tom exclaimed. "Do I look like I enjoyed myself?" Henry replied. "Does my outfit suggest that I dined in luxury and slept on a bed of feathers last night?" "Well, no," Tom replied, still unable to share in Henry's lightheartedness. "But honestly, Henry, we've been worried sick. You should have come back to camp." "Listen, guys," Henry said, more seriously than before. "If you think I didn't know how much you would worry about me being gone, you're mistaken. My night wasn't exactly pleasant either, but the worst part was thinking about how anxious you must have been. Please don't think for a second that I'm devoid of feelings." There was a trace of hurt in Henry's voice, and Tom quickly responded. "I'm sorry, Henry," he said, extending his hand, which Henry clasped. "I didn't mean to blame you unfairly. I know how caring and generous you are." "Exactly," Sam added. Nothing could make us happier than seeing you back safe, but please tell us what happened. Where were you?" "Not a word until I've eaten," Henry said, slipping back into his playful demeanor. "I'm starving." "Got it," Tom replied. "We made more than enough to share, and we didn't eat much, so your breakfast is ready." "I'm starting to feel hungry myself now that you're back safe," he said. "Same here," Sam replied. "Let's start fresh and have breakfast together." Chapter 15. "All right then," Sam said as breakfast got underway. "Spill the beans, Henry." "Well," Henry replied, "you know we're Jenkins Crusoes." "Cut the nonsense and just tell your story," Tom urged, hardly able to contain his excitement over Henry's adventures. "That's exactly what I'm doing," Henry insisted. "As I mentioned, we're Jenkins Crusoes, and I've encountered the savages." "What do you mean by that?" Sam asked, puzzled. "Well, you know, Friday. But actually, that's a mistake. His real name should be Thursday, and he's not tame at all. Honestly, I'm starting to think Jenkins Mariner was exaggerating." "Have you lost your mind, Henry? What's wrong with you?" Tom asked anxiously, genuinely worried that whatever Henry had experienced had affected his sanity. "I've never been more clear-headed in my life," Henry said, smiling. "But you won't let me share my story as I wish. Now listen closely, and don't interrupt. Remember how scared Mariner was when he found the footprint in the sand?" "Yes, absolutely." "And how he eventually spotted the savage who made it, and how shaken he was to realize he wasn't really king of the world." "Right so. Well, I've had a similar experience, only more intense. This island isn't as deserted as we thought. There are savages here, and they're not the tame sort like Mariner's Friday. They are very much wild. At least, my savage Thursday is. I call him Thursday because that was yesterday, and that's when I first saw him. That's how Mariner came up with a name for his savage, if you remember." "Yes, but just get on with it," Sam urged. "All right, listen closely. I went out to the rice patch and brought in one load. After that, I went for more, and once I had filled my trousers, I decided to take a stroll down toward the shore and return that way. As I walked along the edge of the rice patch at sunset, I spotted a footprint, just like Mariner did, but I didn't dwell on it for long, because soon its owner appeared. He was a massive man, dark as midnight, and not at all friendly. In fact, he appeared quite furious with me for some reason, charging toward me while spouting his unfamiliar language and sending his dog after me. I sprinted as fast as I could toward the thicket beyond the rice swamp, more than a mile away on the other side of the island. I had a decent head start, but it was a narrow escape. As I neared the woods, I spotted the tree I intended to climb, and when I reached it, I scrambled up faster than I ever had before, as the big, menacing dog was right on my heels. It leapt after me, but I drew up my leg just in time, and it missed its target. I was exhausted, completely out of breath, but I figured if I just waited until the big man caught up, I could talk to him and persuade him to call off his dog. I had mistaken him for a regular man, not realizing he was a fierce savage. I quickly discovered my error, though, as he arrived and began shouting at me. I was certain he was swearing, though of course I couldn't understand a word. It turned out he spoke only in his native tongue and knew nothing of English. I was in quite a predicament. My tree stood about 1.5 miles from camp, even in a straight line, so shouting for help was pointless. There he was, the furious savage, ranting at me and menacingly brandishing his club. And worse yet, his dog was waiting patiently at the base of the tree, hoping for a piece of me for dinner. I tried reasoning with the savage, but he didn't understand me any more than I understood him. The more I spoke, the angrier he became. Then I remembered reading somewhere about the expressive language of gestures and signs that everyone is supposed to understand, so I decided to give that a try. I shrugged my shoulders, waved my hands, pointed at him to call off his dog and head home, and did all sorts of things like that. But it didn't help at all. That brute just kept misunderstanding me, and his dog was getting more and more agitated. In a moment of frustration, to see if this misguided fool could grasp any form of sign language, I put my thumb to my nose and wiggled my fingers while shaking my other fist at him. He caught that and took even greater offense. In his fury, He attempted to climb my tree to reach me, but he wasn't very graceful at it and made little progress. When he got close enough, I struck him a sudden blow with your trousers, Sam, which were packed full of rice and made for a decent club. He fell like a shot squirrel, and his dog, thinking I had come down, dashed toward him. For a brief moment, I thought I could escape while the savage and the dog figured things out, but I was quickly disappointed. The dog figured out the mistake right away, and the savage got back up, angrier than before. It was starting to get dark, but he decided to play a game of bat and ball with me while he still had some light. He aimed carefully and hurled his club at me. I swung your trousers and knocked it back to him. He threw again, and the result was the same. On the third throw, he missed completely, and I didn't manage to hit it either, but that didn't really matter since I figured the savage didn't know the rules of the game. Finally, after he had thrown quite a few times, his club got stuck in the tree, and I climbed up to retrieve it. A sturdy club lay by the fire, and I thought I might need it later, so instead of throwing it back at the savage's head as I'd initially planned, I decided to keep it for future use. As night fell, the savage settled in to watch me. He stayed silent, making sure his dog ceased its growling and snarling. At first, I didn't quite understand his intent. I began to think he might offer me some terms, but he didn't. Eventually, it dawned on me that he was biding his time, waiting for me to doze off. There was nothing to do but stay awake, and with the cold biting at me, I had to move around a bit to keep warm, which helped keep me alert. What made it worse was seeing the big fire you all had made and knowing the anxiety you were feeling. I sat there in the dark, hour after hour, fretting and wondering if Dawn had forgotten about me, and it was truly a dreadful time. When the rain finally came, it soaked me to the bone. The savage couldn't remain sitting on the ground for long in the downpour, so he stood up and moved around restlessly, but he didn't leave. His determination was admirable, though it was for a cause that didn't deserve it. After a while, he began gathering branches to build himself some kind of shelter, I guessed, or perhaps just something to sit or stand on. I'm not sure what he intended. It was slow going in the dark, and he had to venture a little way off to find what he needed. While he was gone on one of these trips, an idea struck me. However, since he was already headed back, I couldn't act immediately, so I remained still and waited. He wandered off again, 50 or 75 yards into the woods. I could tell by the noise he made as he broke through the underbrush. That's when I decided to put my plan into action. As I climbed down to the lowest branch of the tree, I spotted the dog, its dark shape poised and alert, waiting for me. I gripped the club in my right hand and let a pair of trousers, stuffed with rice, drop to the ground. The dog, mistaking the bundle for me, lunged at it immediately, giving me the chance I needed. I jumped directly onto the creature, and fortunately my left foot landed on its neck. I couldn't hold it down for long, but it bought me a moment's advantage, enough for me to strike the beast 2 or 3 times on the head, which I believed must have crushed its skull. Whatever the case, it went limp beneath me and didn't make a sound. In a rush, I snatched up the trousers and swung them over my shoulder just as Mr. Savage burst out of the woods. I still had the club in my hand, and without thinking I struck him with it and took off. I couldn't tell how badly I had hurt him, but it clearly wasn't enough, as he only paused for a few seconds before giving chase. I ran with all my strength, with him hot on my heels. Suddenly I tripped over something, probably a grapevine, and nearly fell, but I managed to catch myself. Mr. Savage wasn't so fortunate. He stumbled over the vine and crashed to the ground like a falling tree. For a moment he was silent, but then I heard him cursing in his language. By that time I was already 50 yards ahead, and while he debated whether to continue the pursuit, I was far enough away that it didn't matter. The darkness was thick, and if he had followed me, he wouldn't have found me, so I eased up on my pace and soon settled into a walk, listening carefully for any sign of him. Hearing nothing, I kept moving forward. I wasn't quite sure where I was, so I figured it was best to keep walking straight ahead until I reached the shore. I passed by a cluster of huts about a mile from my tree, which I assumed were inhabited by the locals since I could hear dogs barking, but I didn't want to stop and ask. Eventually, I reached the beach, and thinking I had made it more than halfway around the island, I turned right and followed the shoreline until I got back to camp. That's the whole account of my strange adventures, Master Charles Black's exploration of Bee Island, my encounter with the local people, and my narrow escape back to my companions. How did you hurt your foot, Tom? Tom, who had gotten up and was limping around the fire, explained what had happened, and then he and Sam shared their version of the events from the previous night with Henry. Their tale wasn't as thrilling as Henry, but he listened intently, captivated by their experience. Chapter 16. Who on earth can Henry's savages be, Tom? Sam asked after the story wrapped up. Negro squatters, Tom replied. I didn't think any were left on Bee Island. What do you mean by Negro squatters? They're black people who, instead of taking jobs or renting land, have just settled on the island. They cultivate small patches of land and survive by hunting and fishing. There are quite a few on plantations that have been abandoned since the war. When the war ended, many men had large tracts of land. Some even owned half a dozen big plantations, but they had little money. Because they lacked capital, they couldn't resume farming their abandoned lands, so many large areas remain idle and unoccupied. Some of the Negroes, preferring not to work for others or pay rent, have just squatted in various places. They're often the less industrious ones, men with no ambition, hardly influenced by civilization. They choose a wild lifestyle, living off fishing, hunting, and when necessary, stealing. But listen, Henry interjected, my savage wasn't a tame Negro at all. He couldn't speak English, I swear. Nor can many of the old Sea Island and Ricefield Negroes. They speak a dialect that only they and the old overseers really understood. In truth, many of them were savages even before the war, untamed descendants from Guinea. They or their parents were brought here from Africa, living their entire lives on these coastal plantations, rarely seeing a white person except for their overseers, and learning very little about civilized life. They were nothing like the Negroes up in Aiken or in the Northeast, for that matter. They were just savages who had learned to work under an overseer, and when the war ended, the worst among them fell back into their savage ways rather than trying to better themselves like the Negroes in other places did. They haven't learned enough to want to be civilized. But why did that guy go after Henry? Because we've been taking from their rice field without realizing it. I didn't think of that. I assumed the rice just grew wild. Maybe it does, Tom replied, but they still claim it as theirs, just like they think this island belongs to them, even though it's my uncle. Now I get who took our supplies, Henry said. But what do we do now? What if the natives decide to attack us here? They might, Tom answered, though I doubt it. They probably want us gone, but mainly they want us to leave them and their rice alone. Now that we understand it's theirs to some degree, we'll respect that and focus on what we have. The priority now is building our boat. We should hurry up with that. True, Sam said. That has to be our top priority, but it seems to me we should also prepare for our own defense. You see, Tom, if they do attack us, we're in trouble. We have nothing to protect ourselves with now that we've lost the gun, and it's risky to rely too much on their good nature. Well, what can we do? We can do quite a few things. I'm not sure what the best course of action is yet, but we'll figure it out while we work on the boat. Then we can share ideas and decide what to do. Let's dedicate the morning to the boat, and then work on defenses in the afternoon. Maybe we can make such good progress that we won't have to spend more than an hour or two each day on that after today. Sounds good, Tom said. Now let's get to work on the boat. With determination, the three boys got started. They secured the stem and stern posts of the new boat to the keel and began the challenging task of putting up the ribs. The ribs were so badly damaged that it took considerable planning and ingenuity to make them functional, but Sam was quite resourceful. Under his guidance, Tom and Henry managed some impressive splicing and bracing, while Sam tackled the more challenging issues himself. By midday, they had managed to fit about half of the ribs into place. We can start to see the shape of our new boat, Tom said. I think it might be even prettier than the old red bird. Speaking of which, Sam interjected, what should we name her? The Phoenix, Henry suggested, then quickly added, No, that won't work, since it's not like she's rising from ashes. The red bird wasn't burned. Right, Tom agreed. That would be quite silly. How about seagull, since, at least in spirit, she came to us from the sea? Better to call her axe, hatchet, and hunting knife, Sam chimed in, because those are the tools we're using to make her. But if we want something more poetic and evocative, why not name her Aphrodite, like the mythical goddess? She's born from the foam of the sea. Aphrodite it is, his companions shouted, and Henry added, You really are the most cultured and poetic of us, Sam, even if you tease us for our sentimental notion of a fitting name. Fine, Sam replied. I'll take that as a compliment, but right now, I'm hungrier than anything else, and that's definitely not just sentimental. Once dinner was finished, the group turned their attention to defense preparations. What plan do you have in mind, Sam? Henry asked. Let me hear what you and Tom think first, Sam replied. Well, I was considering earthworks, Henry said. I've heard they make the best fortifications. Against cannons, sure, Tom commented, but that's only because cannons can't break them down like they can with masonry. Our situation is a whole different challenge, since our enemies don't have cannons. What we need to focus on isn't building fortifications that can be easily destroyed by artillery, but rather finding a way to protect ourselves from the squatters. All right, what do you suggest? Henry asked. A stockade, Tom replied. Can you elaborate? Sam inquired. My idea, Tom explained, is to create a stockade around the camp that extends out into the water on both sides, forming a large sea. If we make it 10 feet high and angle it outward, it will be challenging for the squatters to scale, and we can defend ourselves from within. But how do we build the stockade? Sam questioned. First, we'll need to dig a trench and set timbers in it, angling them properly, then filling in with earth, Tom outlined. Couldn't a strong man just pull a timber down by jumping up and hanging onto it? Henry asked. Maybe if each timber stood alone, Tom conceded, but we'll line them up in the trench and then roll a log in behind each one before we fill it in. After that, we'll set another row and roll in another log, and so on. To pull down a post, they'd have to lift not only the log behind it, but also all the earth on top, which is far more than any 6 men could manage. That's a great plan, Sam said thoughtfully, but it's too ambitious to finish today. We should stick with my idea first and build the stockade later. And what's your idea? Tom asked. To construct a wall of timber around the camp. It won't be as secure as a stockade, since it can be easily climbed, but it's better than nothing and will keep us safe for the night. But I don't think we can build a timber wall as quickly as we could make the stockade, Henry pointed out. To accomplish this, we'll need to cut enough logs to create a barrier all around the camp, which will require 10 times the number of logs needed for the stockade. That's a good point, Sam replied. Also, smaller timbers around 5 or 6 inches in diameter will work just as well for the stockade as larger logs. Considering the condition of our axe, that's an important factor we can't ignore. I concede, Tom's plan is definitely the best one. Let's get to it, and if we can't finish today, we'll figure out a way to patch it up. Fortunately, we have digging tools. The soil along the coast and islands of northeast Carolina is a light, organic mix with sand, and below that there's just sand. There are no rocks, no stones, not even pebbles, and no tough clay, which worked to the boys' advantage. They made great progress digging the trench. Sam and Tom took on the digging, while Henry, who was more skilled with the axe than his friends, cut down small trees and shaped them for the stockade, each about 14 feet long. This way, when they placed them in the ditch, they'd stand about 10 feet above the ground. Digging the ditch was the easiest part of the job. To enclose the hut, the well, and the boat, it needed to be around 150 feet long, so an ample supply of timber was essential. We should space them about 6 inches apart, Sam suggested, to keep the number we use at a minimum for now. If we need to, we can fill in the gaps later, but a man can't squeeze through a 6-inch crack. By positioning the posts like this, each one, with its half of the 2 cracks, will take up about a foot of space, However, cutting 150 pieces of timber with a dull axe was quite an undertaking. By nightfall, the boys had only managed to set up 25 timbers in their places, and they had an equal number ready for use. This was disheartening, and as fatigue set in, Tom and Henry felt especially discouraged. Only Sam seemed to keep his spirits high. "It's looking good so far," he said, glancing at the line of timbers leaning outward from the camp. "Once it's finished, it'll stump all the squatters in northeast Carolina trying to take our fort." "Sure, if we even finish it," Henry replied gloomily. "Come on, Henry," Sam said. "No moping now. We've been in tougher spots than this, and you should know better than anyone. You're in a far better position than you were this time last night, when that man had you trapped in a tree, and you're better off than Tom with his hurt foot." "Poor guy," Henry said, watching Tom limp into the hut with difficulty. "The truth is," Sam continued, "we're just worn out, and that's why everything seems bleak. But it'll look brighter in the morning. We didn't get any sleep last night, and we've spent all day working ourselves to the bone with worry and excitement. We'll feel renewed and more hopeful after we get some rest. Everything that seems dark and discouraging now will look bright and promising by tomorrow morning." "That's true," Tom replied, stepping out of the hut again. "But it would be much better if we could just stop right now and sleep for 10 hours straight without waking up. Unfortunately, we can't." "Why not?" Henry asked, utterly exhausted. "Because we still have some work that has to be finished before we sleep," Tom answered. "What we've done for our defense is inadequate as it stands. We need to build a barrier around the camp tonight." "How are we going to create one?" Sam asked. "With brush. We have plenty already cut from the treetops we trimmed while making the stockade poles." "But brush won't make a very solid defense," Henry muttered. "No, but it's definitely better than having no defense at all," Tom replied. "It's hard to climb over a well-packed pile of brush, especially if we arrange it with the branches pointing outward, which is how we'll do it. It won't take long to build a wall like that, and we can remove it little by little as we set the poles later." Sam liked this idea, and Henry, too tired to protest, agreed. They gathered the brush and carefully arranged it. It wasn't enough to create a complete wall, but they managed to leave only a small gap near the water. "Should we cut more brush tonight, Sam?" Tom asked. "No, I don't think we need to. When we start setting the poles tomorrow, the brush we remove can be used to fill that gap, and for one night we can keep an eye on such a small opening. We need rest and sleep more than anything else right now. You and Henry should lie down." "I'm the newest one among us," I said, "so I'll keep watch for a while before either of you takes a turn." "Keep watch?" Tom asked, puzzled. "Why?" "Well, it wouldn't be wise for all three of us to sleep at once. We could be attacked in our slumber. If there wasn't a risk of that, we wouldn't have even considered building a stockade." As sleepy and exhausted as Tom and Henry were, they understood the importance of staying vigilant. It was a struggle for the 3 tired men to take their shifts that night, but they fulfilled their duty. Sam took the first long shift, followed by Tom, leaving Henry to get a solid few hours of rest and recharge before it was his turn to keep watch.